This video is brought to you by Bespoke Post. Back in June of 2022, I made a video about how our tastes as musicians and as guitarists will change and how ultimately that's a good thing. And I thought I would make a video kind of springboarding off of that video idea. And I want to talk about the cycles of taste as it pertains to guitar gear and how it kind of parallels known cycles of taste, whether that is fashion or musical tastes or, things like that. So as a music listener, I have always kind of gone in cycles, and I don't know why that is. And I know a lot of people do that as well. As an example, I will go through a phase where I'll listen to loads and loads of albums from the 70s, Eagles, Tom Petty, Boston, Zeppelin, things like that. And then I'll shift into a phase, I'll hear something somewhere, and I'll go through a 2010s metalcore phase, right? And I'm listening to loads of like Devil Wears Prada and For the Fallen Dreams and things like that. And then that'll shift. And currently right now, I'm on a huge 90s kick. I have been listening nonstop to a bunch of Stone Temple Pilots albums. And currently, I am on my way to listening to a ton of Frank Sinatra. I just go with the flow. Bespoke Post is a monthly membership club delivering a box of awesome top shelf goods from under the radar brands. It's free to join and you can skip a month or cancel at any time. 90% of the products come from small brands, often based right here in the US. Now, for example, this Damascus steel knife, which is part of the Forge box, is from Buck and Bear Knives located in Pennsylvania. Now, every single month, Bespoke Post introduces their members to cool new gear, including but not limited to outdoor gear, barware, home and kitchen goods, clothing, and depending on where you live, if it's the East Coast, could even be fresh oysters, which is based on how you fill out your quiz. Now, every box of awesome has around $70 worth of goods inside of it. However, you're paying a fraction of that value. You can also preview your box before it's shipped. You'll get a box of awesome assigned to you, and before it's shipped, you'll get a preview of what's to come inside, and you can either keep it, you can swap it, or you can choose to just skip the month entirely at no charge. You get to keep what you want. Now, my first box of awesome that I chose is the Forge. Now, the Forge is a Mini Hunter Damascus steel knife with a leather sheath. Now, this knife is a drop point design and also has 256 layers, which makes it equally as sharp as it is pretty. Now, in my second box of awesome, I got the Swivel. Now, the Swivel is a utilitarian container that I need for my guitar picks, my headstock tuner, and just little miscellaneous bric-bracs around on the desk. To get 20% off your first box of awesome, click the link down below in the description and enter the code RB20 at checkout, or go to bespokepost.com/RB20. I've always found it interesting that when we're younger and we're playing, more aggressive music, as an example, as a metal player, when I was younger in the 90s, I always wanted, a rectifier or a PV5150 because I wanted the most aggressive, heaviest thing ever. And as an example, Bring Me the Horizon, my buddy Lee started out using PV5150s like we all did. However, then he eventually gravitated towards orange amplifiers, and then he eventually landed on Marshall 800s, yet his tone didn't really seemingly change that much. It's still this huge, gigantic wall of sound, and he's able to achieve it no matter what he uses, really. And my taste, as I've gotten older, has definitely gravitated towards, vintage styled stuff. This custom Valentine, for example, is a very vintage themed guitar. I made it kind of modern, and I'm seeing this happen a lot, whereas instead of going back to something, whether that's a vintage styled guitar or something, now modern and vintage are kind of becoming one. They're merging quite a bit more than they used to. Now, I'll give you an example, a really recent one. When I think of really modern guitar players, I think of someone like my buddy Mike Stringer from Spiritbox. Spiritbox is an ultra modern sounding band, and he uses, for the most part, ultra modern tools to get his sound, or at least he did until recently. So when I think of Mike, I think of Aristides guitars, which aren't even made of wood, into, a fractal axe effects for his tone generation. However, his most recent guitars are 90s styled 7-string Surfcasters from the Jackson Custom Shop, which are some of the nastiest guitars I've ever seen in my entire life. However, those are very vintage themed, and Mike loves vintage styled guitars as well. He's a big fan of those in addition to the ultra modern stuff. A second example is Andrew Baina, the homie Andrew. He has always liked Aristides guitars amongst other brands, but he is the extended range 8-string guy, and he most recently got an extended range Fender Strat to play in his videos. And when I see these things, I just can't help but think like, yeah, the cycle is real on all levels, whether that is guitar gear, music tastes, clothes. I mean, this is a very 90s looking flannel because I'm from Seattle and that's just what we wore in the 90s. This reminds me of that time. I'll be honest, that's why I wear this. But, my first guitar was this Fender Strat. A Fender Strat is as classic as they come. However, when I think of something more modern, I inevitably will think of a vintage guitar, or at least a guitar that started off being vintage. This Jim Root Jazzmaster is clearly not a vintage instrument or a vintage themed instrument. However, the shape is vintage with modern amenities, and I think this is just becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on. Now, where do I think styling is gonna go as far as guitars go in particular? I think they're just gonna start going and folding over onto themselves, and I think we're gonna see a lot of mergings of old and new, and those boundaries pushed even further. I mean, the Jackson Surfcaster stuff is a great example. Using Lee Malia, again, as another example, he has the most ridiculous Jackson Surfcaster that they made him from the custom shop, and people went bonkers in his Instagram comments. I don't think a lot of them realize like that was a 90s guitar. That was a thing. Scott Ian used to play Surfcasters in the 90s with Anthrax. So again, these cycles are always happening, and I've just been seeing the evidence more and more recently in the guitar playing world. Now, will there always be room for a classic Gibson Les Paul standard? Yes, there will be. However, there will always also be room for a super hyper modern sleek riff machine like this Schecter Keith Merrill model, as an example. And I think these two things are going to continue to just meld into each other and come up with additionally awesome instruments that we have yet to even see. Have any of you ever recognized the cycle of trends of styling in the guitar world? If you have, let me know down in the comments. I think this is a really interesting subject and something that no one really consciously talks about. I mean, you can see this in all levels, whether it's a modern plug-in or a processor or pedals, especially you see it a lot in pedals, but especially in the guitar world, the guitar actual instrument guitar world. Yeah, you see a lot of convergence of the two different styles of old and modern, and I just thought I would comment on it and get your guys' gears a-turning. I will link down below in the description if you feel like supporting this channel and hitting that subscribe button. And with that, you've been wonderful. I've been Fluff. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.